After the conquest of Constantinople in 1453, Mehmed II initiated the construction of a new imperial residence to establish a permanent administrative and symbolic centre for the Ottoman Empire, rather than continuing to use older Byzantine structures. He chose a strategic location on the Saray-Burnu promontory, overlooking both the Bosphorus and the Golden Horn, ensuring control, visibility, and prestige. The construction of Topkapi Palace began around 1459 and developed gradually over several decades. The palace was not built as a single unified structure, but as a complex of courtyards, pavilions, and administrative buildings. This modular design reflected both practical governance needs and the traditional nomadic heritage of earlier Turkic rulers, where space was organized around separate functional units, rather than a single monumental hall. During Mehmed II's reign, the palace served primarily as the administrative heart of the empire. Key state institutions, including the Imperial Council, Divan, were located within its walls. High-ranking officials, scribes, and advisors operated here, transforming the palace into a centre of bureaucratic governance, rather than merely a royal residence. This marked a transition from a mobile court system to a fixed imperial administration. Mehmed II also used the palace to reinforce his authority and imperial identity. He adopted the title Kaiser-i-Rum, Caesar of Rome, presenting himself as the legitimate successor to the Roman emperors. The palace architecture and ceremonial practices were shaped to reflect this claim, blending Byzantine imperial traditions with Islamic and Turkic elements, creating a unique synthesis of political symbolism. The early phase of the palace included essential structures, such as the first courtyard, which functioned as a public and service area, and the second courtyard, where state affairs were conducted. Defensive walls, gates, and controlled access points emphasized security and hierarchy, ensuring that only authorized individuals could approach the inner sections of the palace. Topkapi Palace functioned as the central governing institution of the Ottoman Empire, where political authority was organized, decisions were formalized, and imperial policies were enforced. The palace was not merely symbolic, it was the operational core of state power, where governance was conducted through structured procedures and defined administrative roles. At the heart of this system stood the Imperial Council, known as the Divan, where senior officials gathered to deliberate on matters of state. The council was led by the Grand Vizier, who acted as the chief executive authority under the Sultan. Discussions included military campaigns, financial management, provincial administration, and legal disputes, making the Divan a crucial decision-making body within the empire. Administrative communication across the empire was coordinated from within the palace through a highly organized scribal system. Professional bureaucrats recorded decrees, maintained archives, and ensured that imperial orders were transmitted accurately to distant provinces. This system allowed centralized control over a vast and diverse territory, stretching across multiple continents. The palace also served as the headquarters of financial administration. Treasury officials managed state revenues, tax collection records, and expenditures, ensuring the economic stability of the empire. The proximity of financial offices to the political center allowed rapid coordination between fiscal policy and imperial decision-making. Access to different sections of the palace reflected the hierarchical nature of Ottoman governance. Outer courtyards accommodated officials, soldiers, and petitioners, while inner sections were reserved for high-ranking administrators and the Sultan's immediate circle. This spatial organization reinforced authority, discipline, and controlled interaction within the administrative system. The architectural design of Topkapi Palace is based on a sequential and hierarchical layout, structured through a series of courtyards connected by monumental gates. Each courtyard represents a transition in status and function, gradually moving from public accessibility to highly restricted imperial spaces. This layered organization allowed both physical control and symbolic expression of authority. The palace does not follow a single, unified architectural plan. Instead, it developed as an accretive complex over time. Individual buildings such as pavilions, kitchens, audience halls, and service structures were added according to need. This approach resulted in a flexible layout, where each structure maintained its own identity while still contributing to the overall system. A defining characteristic of the complex is the use of open space. Large courtyards, gardens, and terraces play a central role in the spatial experience, separating buildings and creating visual axes toward the Bosphorus and the Sea of Marmara. This integration of architecture with landscape emphasizes both control of the environment and aesthetic harmony. The palace relies heavily on horizontal expansion rather than vertical monumentality. Buildings are generally low-rise, spreading across a wide area rather than rising in height. This reflects both practical considerations such as seismic awareness and climate, and cultural preferences rooted in earlier Turkic and Islamic architectural traditions. Circulation within the palace is carefully regulated through gates, corridors, and controlled entry points. Movement from one section to another required permission, reinforcing administrative hierarchy and ensuring security. The architectural plan therefore functioned not only as a physical environment, but also as a mechanism of governance. Decorative elements within the palace emphasize refinement, rather than overwhelming scale. Interiors feature tilework, calligraphy, and carved details, while exteriors remain relatively restrained. This contrast highlights the distinction between the public image of authority and the private spaces of imperial life, where artistic expression was more concentrated. The first courtyard of Topkapi Palace functioned as the outermost and most accessible section of the complex, serving as a transitional zone between the city and the inner administrative areas. Entry was made through the monumental imperial gate, Babı Humayun, which marked the official threshold into the imperial domain, while still remaining open to a broad segment of the population. This courtyard was the only part of the palace where non-elite individuals could enter relatively freely. Merchants, craftsmen, petitioners, and visitors could access this space without requiring special permission, making it a point of interaction between the state and the public. Despite this openness, it remained under strict supervision, reflecting the controlled nature of imperial authority. One of the most significant structures located within this area is Hagia Irene, a Byzantine church that was repurposed during the Ottoman period. Instead of being converted into a mosque, it was used as an arsenal and storage facility for weapons and military equipment, highlighting the practical functions embedded within the courtyard. The first courtyard also contained service buildings essential to the daily functioning of the palace. These included bakeries, storage areas, and workshops that supported both administrative operations and the needs of palace residents. The presence of such facilities demonstrates that this space was not purely ceremonial, but also logistical in nature. Large open green areas and tree-lined paths defined the visual character of the courtyard. Unlike the more structured inner sections, this space retained a park-like atmosphere, allowing movement, gathering, and controlled circulation. The openness of the area contrasted with the increasing restriction encountered in subsequent courtyards. The second courtyard of Topkapi Palace served as the principal administrative zone where the core functions of imperial governance were carried out. Access to this area was strictly controlled through the Gate of Salutation, Babu Salam, marking a clear transition from the public-facing outer court to a space reserved for officials and state personnel. This courtyard housed the Imperial Council Chamber, known as the Divan, where high-ranking administrators convened to manage state affairs. The Grand Vizier presided over meetings, while other viziers and officials participated in discussions concerning governance, military strategy, diplomacy, and internal administration. The architectural positioning of the council chamber emphasized its central role in decision-making. Overlooking the Divan was the Tower of Justice, a prominent vertical element within an otherwise horizontally organized complex. This structure symbolized the Sultan's ultimate authority and his role as the guarantor of justice, even when he was not physically present in council meetings. It visually reinforced the idea that all administrative actions operated under imperial oversight. The courtyard also contained the palace kitchens, which formed one of the largest service complexes within the entire palace. These kitchens were responsible for preparing food for thousands of individuals, including court officials, servants, and members of the imperial household. Their scale reflects the logistical demands of maintaining a centralized court system. In addition to administrative and service buildings, the second courtyard functioned as a space for formal ceremonies and official gatherings. Processions, receptions, and state rituals were conducted here, making it both a working environment and a stage for the production of imperial authority. Spatial organization within the courtyard maintained strict hierarchy and discipline. Buildings were arranged along defined paths, and movement was regulated to ensure order. The controlled access to the next section, through the Gate of Felicity, further emphasized that this area represented the highest level of administrative activity accessible to officials before entering the private domain of the Sultan. The third courtyard of Topkapi Palace marked the transition into the most restricted and elite administrative educational zone of the palace. Entry was controlled through the Gate of Felicity, Babusada, which functioned as both a physical and symbolic boundary, separating the outer administrative world from the inner imperial domain. Only selected officials, palace staff, and individuals with direct authorization could pass through this gate. At the center of this courtyard stood the audience chamber, Ards Odası, where the Sultan received high-ranking officials, foreign ambassadors, and important guests. Unlike the more collective decision-making environment of the council in the previous courtyard, this space represented direct, personal rule. Here, final decisions were communicated, and diplomatic ceremonies were conducted under strict protocol. The courtyard also housed the Enderun School, an elite institution responsible for training future administrators, military commanders, and court officials. Students were selected through the Devshirme system and educated within the palace in disciplines such as governance, languages, military skills, and court etiquette. This system ensured a continuous supply of highly trained individuals loyal to the central authority. Residential and functional buildings within the third courtyard were designed for both education and daily life. Dormitories, classrooms, and service areas were integrated into the architectural layout, creating a self-contained environment. The organization of space reflected discipline, hierarchy, and constant supervision, which were essential elements of the training system. The courtyard also included important cultural and intellectual spaces, such as the Imperial Treasury and later additions like the Library of Sultan Ahmed III. These structures highlight the role of the inner court not only as a centre of governance, but also as a repository of knowledge, wealth, and cultural production. The spatial character of the third courtyard is quieter and more enclosed compared to the outer sections. Gardens, smaller-scale buildings, and controlled pathways create an atmosphere of exclusivity and order. This design reinforces the idea that the closer one moved toward the centre of the palace, the more restricted, refined, and symbolically significant the environment became. The imperial harem within Topkapi Palace functioned as a private residential and administrative domain reserved for the sultan's family and household. It was a highly regulated environment, physically separated from the rest of the palace and accessible only through controlled entrances. This isolation ensured both security and the maintenance of strict internal order. The harem was not merely a domestic space, but also an institution with its own hierarchy and governance. At the top stood the Valide Sultan, the mother of the reigning sultan, who held significant authority over internal affairs. She supervised the organization of the household, controlled access, and influenced political matters through her proximity to the ruler. Women within the harem were organized according to rank and function. They included consorts, attendants, and trainees, many of whom were educated in language, music, etiquette, and court culture. Advancement within this system depended on discipline, skill, and favor, creating a structured social environment with clearly defined roles. The physical layout of the harem consisted of interconnected rooms, corridors, and courtyards designed to support both privacy and supervision. Living quarters, reception rooms, baths, and service areas were arranged in a way that allowed movement while maintaining strict control. Decorative elements such as Iznik tiles and carved woodwork emphasized refinement and status. The harem also played a role in dynastic continuity and imperial politics. It was the place where future sultans were born and raised, making it central to succession. Relationships, alliances, and rivalries within this space could influence broader political developments in the empire. Daily life in the harem followed a disciplined routine shaped by education, ceremony, and household duties. Activities included training, religious practices, artistic pursuits, and formal gatherings. Despite its seclusion, the harem was deeply connected to the functioning of the palace, acting as both a domestic centre and a subtle sphere of political influence. Within Topkapi Palace, sacred relics were preserved as objects of profound religious importance, forming a distinct spiritual centre inside the imperial complex. These relics were housed in special chambers, most notably the Privy Chamber, Hırka-i Saadet Dairesi, which was reserved exclusively for their protection and veneration. Among the most significant items were relics associated with Prophet Muhammad, including his cloak, sword, and other personal belongings. These objects were not only valued for their historical connection, but were also regarded as carriers of spiritual blessing, reinforcing the legitimacy and religious authority of the Ottoman rulers. The collection also included items linked to earlier Islamic figures and sacred history, such as relics attributed to prophets and companions. Some objects were associated with important religious sites, including keys and artifacts connected to the Kaaba. Together, these relics created a comprehensive representation of Islamic heritage within the palace. The presence of these relics elevated the palace beyond a political and administrative centre, giving it a sacred dimension. The Ottoman sultans, who also held the title of caliph in later periods, positioned themselves as guardians of these holy objects, thereby strengthening their role as leaders of the Islamic world. Religious practices were integrated into the care of the relics. Continuous recitation of the Quran was maintained in the chambers where they were kept, ensuring a constant atmosphere of devotion. Special ceremonies and rituals were also performed, particularly during significant religious occasions, highlighting the ongoing spiritual function of the space. Access to the relics was highly restricted and regulated. Only selected members of the court and religious officials were permitted to enter the chambers, and even then under strict protocol. This controlled access reinforced both the sanctity of the relics and the authority of the state in managing religious symbols. Daily life inside Topkapi Palace was highly structured and governed by strict routines that reflected the hierarchical nature of the Ottoman Empire. Every individual within the palace, from high-ranking officials to servants, followed a defined schedule that regulated work, education, and ceremonial duties. Order and discipline were essential to maintaining the functioning of such a large and complex institution. The day typically began early, with preparations for administrative tasks and court activities. Officials gathered for meetings, scribes recorded documents, and messengers coordinated communication with different parts of the empire. These daily operations ensured that governance remained continuous and responsive to ongoing political and military developments. Food preparation and distribution formed a major part of daily activity. The palace kitchens operated on a massive scale, producing meals for thousands of residents. Different ranks received different types of food, reflecting their status within the palace hierarchy. This system of allocation reinforced social order and clearly distinguished levels of privilege. Education and training were ongoing processes within the palace, particularly in institutions like the Enderun School. Young trainees received instruction in languages, administration, military skills, and etiquette. Their daily routines combined academic learning with physical training, preparing them for future roles in the state. Ceremonial practices were integrated into everyday life. Formal audiences, processions, and ritualized gatherings occurred regularly, reinforcing authority and tradition. Even routine actions were often carried out with a sense of protocol, reflecting the importance of symbolism in imperial culture. Leisure and personal activities also had a place within palace life, though they remained regulated. Music, poetry, and artistic pursuits were encouraged among certain groups, while gardens and courtyards provided spaces for controlled relaxation. Despite moments of leisure, the overall atmosphere remained disciplined, with constant supervision ensuring adherence to established rules. Following the collapse of the Ottoman Empire and the establishment of the Republic of Turkey in 1923, Topkapi Palace underwent a fundamental transformation from an imperial residence into a public museum. This transition was formalized in 1924 under the leadership of Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, reflecting a broader effort to preserve historical heritage, while redefining national identity in a modern, secular context. The conversion process involved reorganizing the palace's internal spaces for public access and exhibition. Areas that were once restricted to the ruling elite, including administrative chambers, residential quarters, and ceremonial halls, were open to visitors. Artifacts such as imperial garments, weapons, manuscripts, and treasury objects were systematically displayed to illustrate the cultural and political history of the empire. As a museum, the palace became a key institution for the preservation of Ottoman material culture. Conservation efforts were implemented to protect architectural elements, decorative arts, and historical objects from deterioration. Specialists worked to maintain the integrity of structures and collections, ensuring that they could be studied and experienced by future generations. The site gained international recognition as one of the most important cultural landmarks in Istanbul. It attracts millions of visitors annually, contributing significantly to cultural tourism and global awareness of Ottoman history. Its collections, particularly the imperial treasury and sacred relics, are considered among the most valuable of their kind. In the modern era, the palace functions not only as a museum but also as an educational and cultural centre. Exhibitions, research initiatives, and guided tours provide insight into the administrative systems, daily life, and artistic achievements of the Ottoman period. This role allows the palace to serve as a bridge between past and present. The transformation of the palace reflects a broader shift in how historical spaces are understood and utilized. Once a symbol of exclusive imperial power, it now operates as a shared cultural heritage site, accessible to a global audience. This change highlights the evolution of historical memory, where former centers of authority become spaces of learning and collective identity.